Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be introducing George Orwell's 6 Rules for Writing. You can apply this set of principles to any kind of writing, but this video will demonstrate how you can use these rules as part of your editing strategy for your personal statement and supplements. As with our previous videos, if you're in a rush or you don't want to watch the whole video, you're welcome to skip to the end where there will be a summary and key takeaways. So these rules are helpful because they give you a concrete framework for looking at ways you can improve your writing. Now, when I was a kid, my mom, who happens to be a novelist, would tell me to read my essay out loud to get a sense for how it sounded. And this is a good it's a good starting point because when you read something out loud, you'll catch the obvious errors and you'll feel how it flows. The problem was, after I'd read it out loud a couple times, I wouldn't know what else to do. Having a set of simple rules, such as these, would have been really beneficial for me as I went about editing. Alright, some quick context. Most of you probably know George Orwell from his fictional works 1984 and Animal Farm. He was also a prodigious essayist and journalist, and he published some incredible nonfiction as well. As a quick aside, I'd recommend you check out Homage to Catalonia, which is a nonfiction account of Orwell's experiences fighting as a volunteer for the Republican faction in the Spanish Civil War. Now, in 1946, Orwell published an essay titled Politics and the English Language. In the essay, he drew parallels between what he saw as the decline of written English language and the decline in the quality of our political thought. The world had just witnessed the rise of fascism in Germany over the previous decade, and Orwell was convinced that political writing was both bad writing and that it tended to try to defend the morally indefensible through literary sleight of hand. If you're interested in a deep dive on Orwell and his ideas on how politics and language are connected, by all means, go read the essay. For our purposes, though, we can look at the rules and see how they can be applied to help improve our drafts. The rules are as follow. 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. 2. You never use a long word where a short one will do. 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. 4. Never use the passive where you can use the active. 5. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. And finally, Rule 6. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. I'll concentrate on rules 1 through 3, and then I'll touch on rules 4 and 6. For rule number 1, we're aiming to avoid cliché imagery. So if the reader is used to seeing the metaphor or simile, the image loses its emotional impact. One obvious example might be, like a hot knife through butter, or it hit me like a ton of bricks. Here's your takeaway. This is a straightforward rule to implement. As you read through your draft, look for metaphors, similes, or images that you have frequently heard or read before, and look for alternate ways to phrase them. On to Rule 2. This is one of my favorite rules. I've had many students over the years who wanted to show off their high-level academic vocabulary. But as a general rule, the more I, as a reader, have to think about what a word means, the less I'm able to connect with the essay on an emotional or personal level. Here's a quick example for you. Take the sentence, "It was a sunny morning when I got the lugubrious phone call." Now, no matter how big my vocabulary is, if you use a word like lugubrious, I, the reader, will be thinking about what lugubrious means, and I'm not going to be fully engaged in the emotional experience of reading the essay. Now, if we contrast that first sentence with another variation where we say, "It was a sunny morning when I got the unhappy phone call," well, this might not be the most beautifully written sentence, but I, the reader, will fully understand the meaning of the sentence, and hopefully I'll appreciate the contrast between the happy sunny morning and the sad call on a subconscious or emotional level. Here's your takeaway for rule number 2. As you read through your draft of your personal statement, check to make sure you're using language that doesn't alienate the reader by being unnecessarily obscure or overly academic. On to rule number 3. This is my favorite of all the rules. We want to create clear, powerful, concise text. And frequently, the emotional power of an essay gets a little diluted with unnecessary filler words, parentheticals, or complex sentence structures. Given that we're on strict word counts for personal statements, you should expect to do multiple rounds of edits where you ask yourself, can I capture the entirety of this thought, including the tone, using fewer words? If the answer is yes, you're almost always better served by cutting out the extra words. I'll touch on rule 4 here. Though any discussion of passive and active voice requires a little nuance. At a very basic level, passive phrasing emphasizes the object of an action while obscuring the person or thing performing the action. For example, the ball is hit by the bat is passive, whereas the bat hits the ball is active. For Orwell, and the way he looked at language and politics, passive constructions tended to be misleading. There's a famous sentence used by many politicians, mistakes were made. This is passive, and Orwell would see it as misleading because we as readers don't know who is responsible for making the mistake. That being said, there are many genres in which passive voice is actually appropriate. In a lab report, for example, you might say, a solution of XYZ was applied to the beaker. That's passive. Or a newscast might report a 37-year-old man in South Philadelphia was robbed last night. Both of those examples are very acceptable use of passive voice. My advice for you is to be conscious of where the subject is in each of your sentences. And if you're using passive voice, make sure you're doing so intentionally. In your college supplements, you should use active voice as much as possible. Actually, I'm going to have an entirely separate video related to that topic as well. We are going to skip Rule 5 and go directly to Rule 6. Here we see Orwell being witty and kind of saying that these rules should be taken as general guidelines. For example, a student asked me, what if I can use one long word rather than 3 short words? Well, we would see Rules 2 and 3 in conflict. And in this type of situation, you should follow your gut and the advice of trusted teachers or counselors or parents. It's important that you've considered the guidelines as you make your edits and that you're intentional about your word choice, but you're ultimately the author, and you should trust yourself to make these types of decisions. To recap what we've gone over, for your personal statement, pay special attention to Rules 1, 2, and 3. It's a useful strategy to read your personal statement with Rule 1 in mind, looking at your imagery and similes. Then read it again with Rules 2 and 3 at the forefront of your mind, looking for word choice and identifying opportunities to make your writing more concise. That's all for this video, but please reach out if you have any questions, and have a wonderful day.